wallop full of mosquitoes. But he stayed too, and in 1929 he built Dudley Clinic at number 9 Asheville Street. At this time also came Ross S. Sterling, and along with him the newly reorganized Humble Oil and Refining Company. And when they chose the 2,200-acre tract near the ship channel to build their refinery, they became permanently entwined in the history of our area. The first medical director of the Humble Oil and Refining Company was a man named Dr. Charles M. Aves, and he hired Norman Brooks Culver to be the hospital superintendent. And together they opened the first hospital in Baytown in 1919 on the refinery grounds. This hospital was called Baytown Hospital, not to be confused with the Baytown Hospital which became Ufana. This hospital predates that one. Well, this refinery hospital must have been a miserable place for the first couple of years. It was a wooden building with 10 beds. There were 8 to 10 World War I surplus tents used for additional patients. And these were connected by a boardwalk to cover the muddy grounds. 3 of these tents were designated for smallpox victims. The hospital had cold running water, a fan, and a stove, and the tents had a bare drop light and just a stove. Dampness caused mildew of the mattresses. The linens had to be sent by boat to Houston to either the Burkhardt Hotel or the Rice Hotel, and it took them more than a week to get them back. Fortunately, these circumstances were corrected in 1923 when a modern brick hospital was built on the refinery grounds. It too was called Baytown Hospital. Well, a series of company doctors worked for Humble. Some names that might come up in your memory are Dr. Robert Worth Pipkin, Dr. H.O. Sappington, Dr. Theodore Howe. But one of the very early Humble doctors was Dr. William E. Marshall. He came here in 1925 and stayed for 5 years as an Humble doctor before he opened his own office for a private practice. Dr. Marshall was a civic leader. He was very influential in the consolidation of the Tri-Cities. And he also was the leading force in the founding of San Jacinto Memorial Hospital. And to tell us that story is Dr. William H. Briddges. He's been an MD for 51 years, 40 of them here in Baytown. Dr. Briddges.
I was listening to Dr. Holsomback, and just to digress a little bit, back in '37 I went out to Mont Bellevue, Barbers Hill. I'd gotten out on an internship. Jefferson Davis and Dr. Sheriff and enticed me to come out there. I know a lot of you, some of the little older do remember the old pontoon bridge. You cross Cedar Bar. And when the Cedar Bar was up very much, you never did get across it because you'd have to, and then the car wouldn't do that way, it just wouldn't make it. So we'd have to go way around, and it took maybe another hour to get over to Goose Creek. But I got to know, sitting there, telling Dr. Holsomback, telling about Dr. Brooks. He had retired, but he always sat in a rocking chair there in the hospital, and I used to stop by and talk with him because he was very interesting about the history of Goose Creek Valley and history of medicine. One of the times I was sitting there, it may not mean much to you, but it means a lot to me. He said, you know, one of the best things that's happened in medicine was when they discovered the pituitary. He said, Doctor, we just didn't save a lot of women. They just bled to death because we had nothing to stop their bleeding. Pituitary was a drug that later became Pitocin. And it is a good drug. Another thing, I was talking to some of my younger counterparts, and I said, well, you know, during World War, and they said, which one? I said, oh, shucks. But anyway, this is back in 1944. A group of men got together, decided that it get some land to build a hospital on. That was in December of '44. And the first hospital board, or trustees, board of trustees, were Johnny and Kilgore, Thomas W. Moore, Robert McLaren, Hugh Eccles Jr., Gordon L. Cornett, C.I. Fontenberry, and Joe Reed. Well, they bought the land, and then Humble Oil and Refining Company gave them money to build a hospital. They started out with, this was '44, and I came here in '46. The hospital was still being built. If you remember back in those days, you know, Goose Creek was not very large then, and the street where the hospital is now wasn't built all the way through. So you look out there and see this hospital being built. And I do have some pictures. I'm sorry I don't have any slides. Pictures that show the hospital under construction. I can pass them around. And this was taken by the great Carew. You all remember. Different views of the hospital. The hospital was built, and the architect, associate architect, Lowell Lambert, I think he's here. He probably can tell you a lot more about that hospital than I can. But when I got out of the service, this was known as the San Jacinto Memorial Hospital. It opened its doors in April, on April 18, 1948. I had just started out in practice. I've been here about 2 years then, and I was bothering Dr. Langford and Dr. Holsomback, delivering babies over there, and with their help doing some surgery at their hospital, and also Dr. Duke and Dr. Lilly. The hospital progressed. I think the board of trustees and the first manager of the hospital, Howard Dickey. And after that, you remember Burton Battle, and others. Then the hospital opened as a 100-bed hospital, and then in 75 beds. In 1966, they had a major expansion of the hospital, and by a 350-bed facility. And then in 1967, they completed a professional office building there. We moved in there. Another thing, too, about Dr. Holsomback, well, I got to know Dr. Holsomback, of course, back then, and we've been friends ever since. And I don't know, we probably not the oldest physicians here, but we're older in the service. Don't you think that's what it is, Dr. Holsomback? And this will probably take you up to present time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bridges. One of the practices that eventually moved to the San Jacinto Hospital was that of Dr. Herbert H. Duke. And here to tell you about him and the hospital he operated with Dr. Gordon A. Lilly is Dr. Duke's son, Dr. H. Duke Jr., a urologist practicing here since 1967.
I've been asked to talk about the Lilly Duke Hospital in Baytown during that era, In order to do that, I need to talk about two very fine physicians. Dr. Gardner Lilly was born in Kansas in 1887, only a year after Asheville Smith died. He grew up in Pawnee, Oklahoma, and was relative to Pawnee Bill, an Army scout and an Indian fighter. He graduated from TCU in 1912 with a degree in medicine. I wonder what happened to TCU Medical School. He moved to Goose Creek in 1919 and opened a small office and later a small hospital located on North Jones Street. He was an owner of the Newton Lilly Oil Company, which was sold in 1946, and he was vice president for many years of the First National Bank. He was my father's first partner, and they built the Lilly Duke Hospital at Asheville, Smith, and Pierce Street in 1936. He was the first president of the East Harris County Medical Society. He was a good partner and very close friend of my father and my mother. My father was born in Belzona, Mississippi in 1901. His father was a Methodist minister, and the family moved around a lot. My dad was always small, and this coupled with the fact that he was a preacher's son always caused him to have to fight his way in and out of schools all over Central Texas. This was a habit he retained throughout his entire life. He grew up in Central Texas and attended the University of Texas at Austin. During that period of time, he even was in a minstrel show, a traveling minstrel show, and was even in blackface. My mother and my sister tell me that he used to tell them that he had shoes on that said he would cross his shoes and it would say hello, and then they would uncross their shoes and it would say oh hell, and everybody would break out laughing. At the University of Texas, he met a very prim young lady, Lenora Cassandra Gage. Apparently, opposites truly attract. While at the University of Texas in Austin, he worked at the Goose Creek oil fields, and he sent home money. He was a cook and a firefighter, and he sent so much money home that his father accused him of theft. Because during the Depression, his father could not imagine anyone making that much money unless they stole it. He returned to Goose Creek in 1923, and he taught chemistry and was the first Gander football coach. He recruited some players as old as he was, he says, from the oil fields. They were very unruly, and he had to establish discipline, and he had to fight some of them to do so. He then attended the University of Texas at Galveston, and my mother worked as a typist during that period of time. Again, they had no money, and they have a funny story about going down to banana boats, because these boats would come in and unload bananas, and if they broke whole stalk, they just leave both halves of the stalk there, and so he would go down and pick up bananas. And I understand they had fried bananas and baked bananas and banana pies, banana cakes. They still like bananas. He returned to Goose Creek after graduation from the University of Texas in Galveston in 1929. He graduated with honors and was also president of the class. When he returned to practice in Baytown, he went to practice with Dr. Lilly in the old hospital on Jones Street. I hadn't been born in that hospital. Apparently, neither one of them were too good at giving ether anesthesia at that time, because I understand that they tried to operate on my father's brother, my Uncle Spencer did. And he woke up during an appendectomy and ran out of the hospital down the street and had to run down the street and get him and bring him back. In 1936, they built the Lilly Duke Hospital, and during the next 30 years, this 22-bed hospital served 18,168 patients. It had only 2 private suites with a bath upstairs. One was decorated by Mrs. Lilly, and the other was decorated by my mother. Medicine was quite different at that time, and there were no freeways, and we didn't have life flight. And so any seriously injured patient simply had to be operated on here, or they died. There just wasn't time to get them anywhere else. And I understand they did everything from minor surgery to brain surgery. He He often took my mother and my sister over mud roads at night on house calls, and he would always leave a cigarette with my mother, and she didn't smoke, but she puffed on the cigarette to keep the mosquitoes away. I'm sure all of you know who met him, who knew him, that he loved the outdoors and was an avid fisherman and a hunter, and he was good with any weapon, and he loved skiing. After a severe automobile accident in 1934, he was told he would never walk again. He entered the Texas Open Skeet Shooting Championship in Houston and won the skeet shooting championship out of a wheelchair with 14-gauge shotgun. He was the Gander team doctor for 25 years, and he was very close to Dan Starward. One Friday night, he failed to show up to a Gander Port Arthur football game. Well, everybody knew this was bad, because he would never miss that game under any normal circumstances. They'd been hunting in East Bay and Robinson Lake with some friends when a norther came in and left the 32-foot cabin cruiser high and dry. They had killed many geese and ducks and were eating ducks and gypsy gravy when they heard on the radio that they were lost. His comment on that was, when he got home, was, hell, I wasn't lost anywhere I was the whole time. He loved to cook, and he often made spoon bread in the mornings after an early morning delivery. He worked constantly with flowers and knew most of their names by their genus and species. He was remarkable that he had almost photographic memory. I think that he had a very varied life, seemed to enjoy everyone and everything that he ever met. He was able to get along in almost any settings. He was active in politics and was a campaign manager for Lyndon Johnson when he ran for as senator from the state of Texas. He was also active in organized medicine. His great fear was excessive intervention of the federal government in medicine, which has in fact occurred. He always stated that the first step to socialized country was controlled medicine. He worked with Dr. James Sammons, who worked very hard in the Harris County Medical Society, and due to his influence, Dr. Sammons went on to become president of the Texas Medical Association and is now executive director of the American Medical Association. He was counselor of the 9th District of the Texas Medical Association when the East Harris County Medical Society branch was founded. The Little Duke Hospital was closed due to excessive regulations imposed by the Joint Commission of Accreditation of Hospitals. He really enjoyed living in Baytown, where there was ready access to hunting and fishing. He enjoys his friends and his family. And during that year of the Little Duke Hospital, he would have coffee each morning with Garrett Herring at the Old Herring Drugstore on Texas Avenue. And his friends would always join him there. His Sun office was on Pierce Street, across the street from the hospital, which is the old Thurns building at the present time. And Fred Hartman would always come over and they would have coffee in the mornings. Fred stayed one time that Dad didn't show up for 2 weeks and he didn't get any free medical advice and almost died. He was president of Rotary Club and he had 30 years of perfect attendance. He got to start the Touchdown Club, the Bayshore Robbery and Gun Club, and the Power Squadron, which is now known as the Goose Creek Navy. After closing the Little Duke Hospital, he moved his office to Sandy Center Professional Building, and at the entrance there is a plaque commemorating his 40 years of service to this community. My father died in 1971 after back surgery, probably as a late result to his automobile accident. He had a very full life, left us with a wonderful philosophy and some wonderful memories. His honesty and integrity, I think, was passed on. He also had a great saying: any man who won't spend his money might just as well have washers in his pockets.
Thank you so much. We appreciate hearing those memories. Now to share some memories of Gulf Coast Hospital is one of its founders, Dr. W.T. Jones, an MD since 1950, retired last year after 20 years as Chief of Anesthesiology at Gulf Coast. W.T.?
Thank you, Rosemary. Real pleasure to be here among people I've worked with for many, many years. I don't know why I decided to retire when Dr. Holsomback and Dr. Briddges have got me beat a little bit, but they're still going strong. My original incentive to be a doctor, of course, came from my uncle, Dr. Malcolm Jones, now deceased. I came to Baytown in 1934, and Dr. Langford was our family doctor. I spent some of my summers in Hempstead with Dr. Malcolm Jones. I got to watch some surgery. That further made me decide I wanted to be a doctor. But after we moved to Baytown, well, my experiences with Dr. Langford bore up the fact that I didn't want to be a doctor. And when I was a junior in medical school in 1948, Dr. Langford made an agreement with me that if I would promise him that I would come in with him, that he would keep a spot for me. So I came back in 1951 and bought a fourth interest. Dr. Langford retired at the time. And I inherited his nerve and stayed with me the whole time that I was in general practice. Faye Martin.
I went to
Dr. Bill Sharp and Dr. H.W. Kilpatrick and myself were going to a Harris County Medical Society meeting in Houston one Wednesday night in 1957. Dr. Sharp and Dr. Kilpatrick were both bemoaning the fact that they wasted 2 hours a day going back and forth from the Black Building on Texas Avenue, where their offices were, to San Antonio Hospital, where they primarily were doing their work. And I told him, I said, man, I said, I got the best of all ways to practice medicine. I said, my office is in the hospital. It's just a few feet to the delivery room, just a few feet to the dressing room for the operating room. And I said, that's the only way to practice medicine. Well, from that conversation, we had a meeting the very next week, invited other doctors who might be interested in this concept of building a new hospital where offices could be right there in the building. And that's how the Gulf Coast Hospital got started. It ended up that there were 6 of us, Dr. Kilpatrick, and Dr. Sharp, Dr. Fail, Dr. Hill, Dr. George Wiles and myself, and we opened Gulf Coast Hospital in August of 1959. And you can see from the notes that Rosemary has on the board up there, the progression that it made. We opened in August of 1959. We had 6 doctors and 50 beds. And that's all the room we had. Well, 30 days after we opened, we found out that we had made a bad mistake. We had other doctors in town, so we went out there with y'all. We, in like December of 59, we started with what's now the pediatric wing on the front of the building and some more offices. By 1965, we had such a clamor, 6 of us still owned it. But at that time, we had 17 doctors out there that are officing and paying rent, and they wanted to be owners. So we formed a new corporation and sold the hospital to the new corporation composed of 17 doctors. And we operated that way until 1969, when the hospital was merged with the Hospital of Phillips. In 1972, they had built some more offices, more beds, and the hospital companies were undergoing a lot of changes at that time, and it ended up, Hospital Phillips had merged with the insurance company in North America. The insurance company in North America didn't want the hospitals, and so in 1981, they sold all the hospitals to Hospital Corporation of America, which is the largest of all the hospital corporations. I think I have had a full life. My family, we've always loved Baytown. We don't ever intend to leave Baytown. My wife and I have had a good time since we retired, and I highly recommend it when the time comes for all of you, because I have not been bored. I do miss the hospital. I miss the companionship and especially feelings for old patients that I have. But I do go by the hospital when I'm in town about once a week and have lunch. So thank you very much.
you all know, there have been many, many doctors that we couldn't even mention tonight. Many of them were important to the medical history of Baytown. Many of them also were important to the community as civic leaders and religious leaders. To name a few of them, Dr. Ham Davis served on the City Council, was president of the Chamber of Commerce. So was Dr. Marshall. Dr. Lee Liggett was mayor. Dr. Robbins and Dr. Briddges served on the school board. Dr. Percy Fail served on Lee College's student loan committee. Dr. A.K. Morris was one of the founders of Baytown's YMCA. Many of them worked through service organizations. Dr. Duke, as well as Dr. Liggett, were president of the Rotary. Dr. Hankins was president of the Lions Club. Dr. Pipkins was president of the Kiwanis. And Dr. Doff was the recipient of a humanitarian award from both the Lions and the Kiwanis. Every religious denomination in town has had doctors who were lay readers, deacons, stewards, wardens, whatever their particular church called it. I'm sorry if we didn't talk about your favorite doctor. I do hope that all of you have some sweet memory of someone who helped you or someone in your family when you were in need. And it's been a great privilege for us to stir some of those memories tonight for you. Thank you for inviting us.
Enjoyed that as much as I did, and we thank Rosemary and all of the doctors who participated. It was really wonderful. We do have some time left, and we're hoping that some of you will come up and share some of your memories with us. We do have Irene Langford, wife of Dr. C.H. Langford here, and the daughter of Dr. Brooks. She's visiting from Georgetown. Would you like to come up and say something, Mrs. Langford?
I have many memories that you folks have left out. I wish I had about 10 hours to tell you some of them, because I think it's very interesting. I remember when this little boy was born. I remember when he fell off of a bicycle and my husband helped him get out of the wheel. Maybe he doesn't remember that. Joyous memories. I loved every minute that I was here. I love my father, I love my husband, I love this community, and I wish I were still here. And I wish I had time to tell you lots of anecdotes and so on that I know. But I guess I don't have that much time, and you would be bored, so. But thank you anyway.
We're mighty glad you're here. And I think Faye Burns Christian, would you like to come up and say something?
I'd like to hear your experiences. I'm not a speaker, so you have to forgive me for my voice. I can't say how much I enjoyed my nursing years here, both in the hospital, both Goose Creek Hospital, and working for Dr. Langford. During those years, and after it became the Baytown